Hey folks, hope you're all doing well and welcome back to the channel. We got the three amigos back, first time in 2025. So both Martin and Pete are with me tonight, and we are doing an album war. Okay, I'll let Martin explain this a little bit more to you as far as what we're going to be doing. But essentially, we're just going to be doing a compare and contrast of two records that from two different bands, but are kind of have some similarities, and then kind of pit them one against each other. So but to help me in that endeavor, again, I got my two partners in crime. Glad to have them both here. We got Mr. Pete Pardo and Mr. Martin Popoff. How are you gentlemen doing this evening?
Doing all right on a wet, soggy Toronto night, that's for sure.
Yeah, wet, soggy, and then we're getting snow again tomorrow, and then it's going to go back to minus 16 on the weekend. So it's going to be an ice rink out there, man. So yeah. Alrighty, so Martin, so I just mentioned briefly at the top. So this I gotta hand this off to Martin. This was Martin's idea for a topic. So Martin, you want to maybe explain a little more in depth what we're going to be talking about this evening?
Yeah. Okay. So the funny thing is, I think you brought this up to begin with, right? And then I had my usual prickliness about this album wars idea, right? I've never liked this album wars idea because I've seen too many random ones where I go like, well, who cares? Why are you pitting this against that sort of thing? So I don't know how many shows I've turned down that have been about album wars, right? But then the odd time along the way, like one of every five that comes up, I see two albums that are proposed and go, yeah, I could see some interesting things to say about those two together. So that's why I said, okay, if we're going to do this album wars idea, it's got to make sense. And, there's got to be some fruition between the two that we talk about, sort of thing. But so that's the thing. So if this was my idea, more or less it was my idea, but I'm the guy who hates album wars. But I think we came up with a good idea for this one.
But this one worked out. Okay. We just say hello to a few people that jumped in early here before we get going. So Eric Dinsey, welcome. Gary Joyce, always a pleasure to see Gary. Logan Collins, welcome. Tyler Patterson, nice to see you. Just going down here quickly. Ken White, how are you? The Elder of Rock, welcome. Okay. I think I caught everyone. Oh, there's John Z351 and Cretan Classics. Nice to have you all here. Alrighty, so what we'll do is we all picked three different ones to do this with. So why don't we just go? We'll go Pete, and then we'll go Martin, and then myself. So go ahead, Pete. What are your first two albums at war?
Okay, so my two first albums at war, both are American bands. And though they were released about a year apart, these both represent the first major breakthrough for each band. The first album is Left Overture by Kansas, and the second is The Grand Illusion by Styx. Cool. Both big platinum sellers, both kind of took both bands into the big leagues and would start like a run of albums for each that would be pretty big sellers for both of them. So I thought they would make a good matchup. And I don't think I've ever talked about the two of them together in like a format like this before.
All right.
Martin?
Okay, so the first one
sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to talk about is Peter Gabriel So and Genesis Invisible Touch, right? And I've just always felt that this was a situation where I almost picture Peter Gabriel hearing this and going, oh, that's adorable. It's like that's kind of silly music you're making, but I don't really want to, make fun of what's going on. But I just feel like where Peter's been this whole path, he's just like light years ahead of where Genesis is going. You know, Genesis is kind of doing some cool things around Abacab and stuff, but what makes Phil like the kind of music he's kind of making on here and the kinds of sounds he wants, mixing that, the horns pop and the ballad pop plus the futuristic sort of sounds. What makes a guy like that who came from Prague and being such a Prague drummer and so committed to the most progressive band of all time kind of go in this direction while Peter Gabriel's doing this? And I just feel like Peter's probably listening to this and biting his tongue and going like, what is Genesis up to? What happened to my band, kind of thing? Because he's moving ahead and also being more commercial with this in his own way, but it's not that. Yeah. It's just really still brainy, right? And then you bring Steve Hackett into it, and that's another level again where, he's actually also doing something still fairly commercial, but he's even less on a big platform. So yeah, both of these are very successful, but I just feel like Peter's probably just shaking his head saying, what is going on? So that was my first.
All right, so Martin, and I'll go back to Pete here in a minute. So Martin, is there one you prefer?
Oh yeah, definitely the Peter Gabriel situation. I think.
Okay.
So, yeah.
It probably would make sense if we each pick which one we think would win these before we gotta just name them all.
All right. Well, I mean, I was gonna we'll talk about them as we go through them. So I'm sure you had more to say about the Kansas and the Sticks.
Yeah, Pete, you caught me off guard there. I thought you were going to say something.
You're going to go on
to just sort of announced what they were. And it's
I thought we were just going to introduce them. That we were
no. You know why? Because I got shit when we did one of these earlier. It's like, you guys told us the picks right off the bat, and we wanted to wait to hear what they were.
Oh, yeah.
So go ahead, Pete.
No, Pete, finish up, Pete. Yeah, that was
your Kansas and Sticks.
So you want me to pick which one I prefer out of the two of them? Is that
sure.
Okay. These are both drop dead classics by both bands, and on any given day, I would probably say these are my two favorites from both bands. This has got hard rock, it's got prog on it, it's got just like arena rock. This is certainly got lots of prog, and maybe one of the great U.S. prog bands. If I had to pick one of these, man, it would pain me to choose one over the other, but I probably would go with Sticks by a hair. I love them both, but I think this may be slightly stronger album and maybe the one I listen to more, but this is amazing too. But yeah, I would probably lean slightly to the Sticks here, but they're both amazing. They're both classics for me.
And it's kind of interesting. They're like the second and third band you would think after Rush when you thought of progressive metal or progressive hard rock, right?
For North America, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, in that time period, for sure, yeah. Alrighty, so the first two albums that I'm going to talk about, Accept, Restless and Wild versus Scorpions, Blackout. So, both German bands, obviously. Both records came out in 82. For Accept, it was their fourth record. For the Scorpions, it was their eighth album. And that kind of sets the tone for this, because the Scorpions record, I mean, I listened to these back to back to get like a real sort of true comparison. And the Scorpions, their production on the record was, Dieter Dierks was miles higher than, the Accept record. The songwriting, there was just like a level of sophistication in the production, in the, even in the songwriting. They just seemed to be kind of like, the elder statesmen compared to the guys just sort of coming up. So that really, really came out a lot, and the guitar playing, I gotta say, man, Matthias Yabs is the star of Blackout, because if you listen to a lot of those songs, all Rudy is doing is just hitting chords, and it's Matthias that's weaving in all these lines that kind of, think of No One Like You, right? What would it be without those Matthias lines over top of those chords, right? It just kind of goes through the whole record, right? right? So, you know, Restless and Wild, it's got some really great songs on it. You know, Fast as a Shark, that, you know, they say is the first, you know, thrash song, but, you know, Overkill came out before that, you know, 79. You know, Demon's Night, Neon Nights, Flash Rock and Man, Princess of the Night, those are all great songs. You know, Don't Go Stealing My Soul's got a little bit of an AC/DC thing to it. So it's like they were kind of on the cusp, but they weren't quite there yet. Where the next record, where the, you know, they're under RCA, you know, the big record company, that's got an amazing. It's like that's when they graduated, you know, with the Balls to the Walls record and the production on that and the songs on that. I mean, that's my favorite Accept record, right? Because from the Accept show that we did years ago. But you know, at this time of, you know, comparing the two in 82, I got to give it to the Scorpions. That is a fantastic record. It's probably still my favorite. Well, no, it is my favorite Scorpions record. I mean, I don't understand the forks in the eyeballs cover, but, you know, whatever. Like, is that what happens when you go nuts? You get forks in the eyeballs, and you're breaking glass. Anyway, but phenomenal record. And yeah, if I was to pit the two, I mean, German bands, both the same year, but again, I think it's just a matter of one is maybe playing the game a little bit longer than the other's got a little more, you know, more albums under their belt. So I'll have to go with the Scorpions for that one.
You know, it's funny, Hack. I I looked at all of the picks that we did, and I in my mind I tried to say, well, who would win for me? And I think if we would have done this like maybe 40 years ago, I might have had the Scorpions edge out by me. But I found personally that over the years that the Scorpions catalog post Uli Roth hasn't aged so well with me personally. And,
oh, really?
And the Accept catalog has risen. To me, Restless and Wild is Accept's greatest album. I like it way more than I like Balls to the Wall. And I think that based on which record I've listened to more in the last decade or two, Restless and Wild by a mile. I still think the Scorpions Blackout album is probably the best album of that era post Roth, but I tend to grab Accept a little bit more than I do the Scorpions from the 80s material, but that's just me. I know some people might, but it's a wonderfully produced album. It's got great songs. I just find that I don't gravitate towards it much at all. Maybe I played it too much back in the day. It's a great album, but I find that Restless and Wild still sounds really, really fresh to me.
I think probably. What was your first exposure to the Scorpions? What album?
Blackout.
Oh, was Blackout. Okay. Because usually there's that was like the first, remember the Columbia House thing, right? That everybody did. I got Blackout, and that was my first. And so that's got a real kind of, you know, a sentimental spot for me. And I mean, listening to it the other day, I mean, it you know, because I listened to the back, and I still love that record. I think a lot of, you know, the ballads are great. I mean, When the Smoke is Going Down, I love that song. They got their Cashmere, you know, China White type song in there. And I don't know, I've always had a real love for that record. So
that was my first, because I saw them on the tour with Rainbow. So it was Blackout and Straight Between the Eyes. And I had known of the Scorpions, but never really listened to them. And I was blown away. So I went out and got Blackout. But then my next purchase was Tokyo Tapes. And that did it for me forever. Yeah. So then I became the Uli guy. And I've just, ever since then, I've gravitated towards the earlier stuff.
Yeah, I saw them first time was on the Love at First Sting tour. They did this thing. I talked about this on the Contrarians channel the other day. They did this thing called the Heavy Metal Hurricane. It was a C&E grandstand, which doesn't exist anymore. They had like 4 heavy metal bands, and the Scorpions were the closer. And it was Rock You Like a Hurricane was the big song at that time. And yeah, and they just, man, it's so much energy, and you know, just. These guys were like just on 10. It was crazy good show. Yeah.
Oh, they were a force to be reckoned with live back.
Oh, live, they were amazing.
Without a doubt. They were probably for many, many years. I always said that one of the best bands I ever saw live was the Scorpions in like the early mid 80s. Just couldn't beat them. Yeah.
Matthias is, I mean, I've always been a huge Matthias Yabs fan. He's one of those guys that nobody mentions that guy, but Holy shit, man. That guy was just absolute. I mean, you know, of course, you know, Uli was great, and you know, Michael when he was in the band was great, but man, Matthias, he just took it to another level as far as like within the song and like I was saying earlier, all those parts he played were just fantastic. Just I've always loved Matthias's playing.
Yeah, really underrated player too.
Yeah,
I think
totally.
the cool thing about this pairing is it's both a super, super exciting band for both bands. Time for both bands career wise, right? Scorpions, there's no more excitement around Scorpions ever than around Blackout. And Accept is just breaking out. This is kind of their breakout album. And
Yeah.
I would say I kind of agree with Pete. I like the way you kind of frame that all about, you know, which is aged better. And yeah, I think I gravitate towards the Accept album as well. But you know, the Scorpions, I think if you're like a record label mogul or a manager or a songwriter or an engineer or something, you'd all go, man, that Scorpions is an absolute masterpiece in record making, right?
Yeah.
And you would never say that about the Accept. But there's just an excitement around the Accept that can't be beat.
Yeah, I mean, when you listen to them back to back, the Accept, again, I love the record. I'm not suggesting that it's a bad album at all, but yeah, it's a lot more raw, you know, in the production, and it's just, you could tell. I mean, these guys were like on the cusp. They weren't quite there. They didn't have the big studio production thing going on. If they did, then maybe, you know, the album would sound, you know, more similar, more slick, more polished, you know. But it is, on its own merits, it is a fantastic record. Don't get me wrong. I love Accept. All right, Martin, what's
I think
sorry,
we're going
I
to Pete
forgot what
next,
order. We're going
right?
to Pete next. Sorry.
Okay, so for my next battle here, I picked my two favorite bands of all time and two albums that were both considered like big comeback albums for each band. So the first one is Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell.
Hmm.
Of course, basically the band is in disarray. Ozzy's gone. They release an album that really wasn't all that well accepted, didn't sell all that well. They reconvened with Ronnie James Dio and released this album under the production of Martin Birch, and basically a new era of Black Sabbath was born. And the other is Perfect Strangers from Deep Purple. So they had been away for quite a number of years. We get Whitesnake, and we get Rainbow and Gillan, and Ian joins Black Sabbath, and so on and so forth. And finally, the reunion of the Mark II era of Deep Purple happened. So, you know, both of these got a lot of acclaim. I think maybe this was the kind of the bigger album because they had been gone for so long. Whereas this, they weren't gone for that long, but they totally retooled their sound. They got the brand new singer. This is the classic lineup of the band. I think both are big successes to make each band relevant once again. If I have to kind of put them up together, I got to look at like kind of where I was at the time. I mean, this was huge for me because when I first got into Deep Purple, they were no more. So I got into Deep Purple around 1979. So there was no Deep Purple at the time. And, I loved the music so much, but never got to see them live, never got to, experience them putting out a new album as it's coming out. So this was such a huge deal for me, even though it meant Ian not being in Black Sabbath anymore, which I was really, really into. For this, what was interesting about this for me is that I had also started getting into Sabbath in the late 70s. And just as I'm getting into the band, I discovered that Ozzy's not in the band anymore. And I'm like, well, wait, when did this happen? Because we don't have any internet, none of that stuff, right? You find out about all these things, when you find out about them. But then when I heard this, I was like, holy cow, this is quite different than the old stuff. But I really, really love it a lot. And that's that dude from Rainbow, right? So,
Yeah.
there's some drop dead classics on both albums. I think for me, where I sit with these today, all these years later, there's way more classics on this album than there is this album. I find that I don't listen to this one as much anymore, and its stock for me has kind of lessened a little over time. I still think it's a really good album. Knocking at Your Back Door and the title track is great.
Yeah.
Under the Gun, Nobody's Home. There's a lot of really strong tracks on here, but there's legendary songs on here. I mean, Neon Nights and Children of the Sea and the title track and Die Young. To me, there's nothing quite the caliber of those tracks on here. So while I think it's a really good battle, they're both really strong albums. I got to go with Heaven and Hell in this particular battle for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of examples where a band gets a new singer and is super successful. I mean, the only other one that comes to mind is AC/DC with Back in Black and bringing in Brian Johnson. But yeah, I love that record. I remember when that record came out. It was all over the radio. I mean, it's just, and to this day, it's still a phenomenal record. Although I think Mob Rules is still a better album.
More consistent, I think.
You know, an interesting thing about that pairing is that, so with the Deep Purple, you get kind of a lean, mean, go to the gym, conservative version of all the highlights of the Mark II lineup. Like when that got reviewed, when I was doing these reliving old reviews, contrarians things I'm doing, I did one on that album, and I read a big long review of Perfect Strangers. And the point there, and it might even been Jeff Barton, so it was an important review, but the point all through it was, this is a really good album. This is a really safe album. And so it was just toggling back and forth between that. So that's what you get with the Purple. With the Sabbath, it's funny. What you get is a conservative, commercial, accessible album, but it sounds nothing like anything from the old days. And it doesn't even sound like the commercial songs from the old days. I mean, there's such a difference with Ronnie there, but it's almost like the version of Perfect Strangers that you would have gotten, and if you would have said they were the same album, is if you would have had a whole album of like Backstreet Kids and Never Say Die, like these tight, accessible, fast, up tempo, not too many parts Ozzy songs. Say Ozzy was still in the band, sort of thing. So yeah, very different situations. And I think creatively speaking, I think just for the daringness and to be a way different band than they were in the past, and as you say, Pete, to have more classics on it, I'd go with Heaven and Hell too.
Yeah, and you have to wonder too, like if Perfect Strangers wasn't such a kind of long delayed, anticipated reunion album, would we still think of it as highly today as we do? You have to wonder if it was just an album that, they never went away and they just kind of, maybe after the Bolin experiment didn't really work, they stayed together. Coverdale and Hughes left, Ian came back, and they released Perfect Strangers, right? Maybe because Perfect Strangers was so anticipated and we waited so long for it that we just got this idea in our heads that it's one of their best albums ever. I think it's a really good album to a great album. I don't think it's one of their best albums ever, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Martin, what are your next two?
Okay, so next I'm going to go with Michael Schenker Group's debut. Michael Schenker Group. Let's see, there we go. And UFO, No Place to Run. So what I like about this comparison is Michael leaves the band. And so starting with UFO, they kind of continue on the same way, but what they lose is that Teutonic Germanness in their sound. They're still a songful band. I think the dynamics are less, but I like the sturdiness of songs. This is my favorite era of the band. So Paul Tonka Chapman comes in. That's the material change, right? And so they become a band that's kind of just a more accessible, slightly Americanized version of what they were doing with Michael. And then Michael, you wonder, he almost surprises us here because he even gets more singer-songwritery, accessible rock and roll songs than even the old UFO with Michael in it. And you would think he's the guitarist, he's doing his quote unquote solo album. It's going to sound like Ronnie Montrose Open Fire or something, right? It's going to be wacky. It's going to be super guitar-y and strange. But I wonder if his mental state at the time was so fragile that he's building this band around him, and maybe Gary Barden is like an outspoken enough guy, and just the people around him, management and all that. They all look at each other and go, we got to make a band that is accessible and has a shot in the marketplace, sort of thing. So I think this was surprising how I actually think that these two records, both of them, are more utilitarian and anthemic and headbanging and just great party rocking albums than Obsession or No Heavy Petting or Force It or any of those, Lights Out. I think Michael surprised us on this by just making this great band. that maybe, you know, you would have thought Michael, soft-spoken German guy, guitar guy, doesn't listen to much music. It's a solo album, and yet this is as useful as this is.
And which one do you prefer?
I'd say I prefer No Place to Run, but I'm happy with both of them because this is actually my favorite UFO album. I think George Martin did an amazing job with it. Oddly, I love the 3 mellow songs on here. They're my favorite softer UFO songs. This Firebirds Tonight, Gone in the Night, and Any Day. I think are better than anything they did in the Schenker years from a light rock point of view. And then the whole rest of it's great too.
All right, cool. So my next 2 picks are 2 of my favorite bands of all time and 2 of my favorite records of all time. I'm going to go Not Fragile versus Hotter Than Hell. Both albums came out in 74. Let's talk about the Kiss record first. So that was the same gentleman that produced the first record, Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise. They went down to LA. They tried to make Kiss sound a lot heavier. Personally, I think the first record, the guitars just have no balls. It's just too thin. That's why those songs sound so much better on a live, because there's just some power behind those songs. So to me, this was like an overcorrection, right? You know, and in trying to make this band, the songs sound heavier, they're super compressed, murky, sludgy, whatever adjective you want to use, you know, sort of permeates the whole record. Now, for some songs, it kind of works. Strange Ways works. Parasite works. Watching You works. But things like Let Me Go Rock and Roll, Mainline, you know, it works for some of the songs, but not for all of them, right? So there's that. But the songs that are on the record are fantastic, right? Then you've got Bachman Turner Overdrive. Randy Bachman produced it. And you listen to that after you listen to Hotter Than Hell, and it's like, oh, there's all that high end. There's all that dynamic range that's missing. The guitars sound big without being squished. You got the vocals riding over top. The songs are, you know, heavy, big, dumb riffs. You know, I call them the lumberjacks of rock. You know, they look like Grizzly Adams and they played big power chords. It all worked and it all sounded really, really good. You know, as far as them, and again, when you compare them, you know, as much as I love Ace Frehley, and I'm a huge Ace guy, okay, but Randy Bachman's playing on this record is just, it's just another level. It's ballsy, but it's more musical. There's just a little more going on, and the songs and the riffs, you know, there's more going on. It just sounds better. And as huge a Kiss fan as I am, if I pit these albums side by side, I actually go for Not Fragile. I'll prefer that. I'll take that over, you know. And yeah, Watching You's great. And like I said, you know, Coming Home, that would be such a great song if it didn't just sound like it's dumped on, like just like you're like they're playing it underwater, like, you know what I mean? I know, again, this has always been a point of contention with Kiss fans. Some Kiss fans love this production. Some Kiss fans don't love with me, it's like it's more of a song to song thing where it works for some and not for others. But you know what? That's not even a point of contention when you're talking about the Not Fragile record, because it just sounds great. It's loud. It's boisterous. You know, it literally sounds like a sledgehammer. You know, just it's amazing. So there you go.
Yeah, I will say Not Fragile is the best BTO album. It's amazing. I'd have a hard time putting it over Hotter Than Hell. And I never disliked the production of Hotter Than Hell. I've been listening to it this way for like
Exactly.
It's almost 50 years. So it's like,
Yeah.
it doesn't bother me at all. I just think for me as a old school Kiss fan, there are just way too many classics on Hotter Than Hell for me. And I love this BTO album, but I would go Heaven a Hotter Than Hell on this. That's just me. But I mean, yeah, just look at this. Got to Choose, Paradise, Going Blind. Parasite, Going Blind, Hotter Than Hell. Yeah, Let Me Go, Rock and Roll is okay. All the Way is great. Watching You is great. I Like Mainline, Coming Home, Strange Ways. Just way too many winners on this one. But you go through Not Fragile. It's like there's crushes all
Rock
over.
Is My Life. This Is My Song. Roll On Down the Highway. Blue Monin, Second Hand.
Yeah.
Sledgehammer.
Well, Sledgehammer is great. I will say the guitar tones on Not Fragile are lethal.
Oh,
absolutely lethal.
They bang you over
if anybody thinks that BTO didn't play proto metal, just listen to this album and Four Wheel Drive too. There's cranking stuff on both of those albums.
An instrumental, but it's not bad. It's still pretty damn good.
Yeah,
Yep. But but listening to them back to back, and I am the biggest Kiss fan, but man, it's like when I listen to them back to back, I sort of lean a little bit more to the BTO stuff. But the Kiss album, Watching You and just Watching You, Parasite, and Strange Ways sold, right? Like that's it, But hey.
I agree with Pete. I think, and the way you're both framing this, I would say if I had to rank all the songs on here, I'd have like 5 Kiss songs before I'd even get to Sledgehammer. I'd have really? 5 off of Hotter Than Hell. Yeah, I would, or at least 4, right? So, and I don't mind the production. I don't even think the BTO production is all that great. And they both have really boring drummers, right? The drumming on both of them, there's not much going on, right?
No.
But yeah, I would say that the Kiss one, because when you start matching up the songs, I'm just talking from a heaviness point of view. There's obviously like a lot of cool songwriting craft that goes into the BTO songs, even when they're not heavy, right? But there's just too many great riffs and too many classics, and literally, you start adding up the riffs on it, and I'd probably have like 7 or 8 riffs before I even got to the very best riff on Not Fragile. So yeah, Hotter Than Hell for me.
All right. Last round. What do you got?
All right. So I picked 2 bands that went through a lineup change on the guitar front. And each of these albums would be the only album featuring this new guitar player. And I figure, it'd be kind of cool to put these up against each other and see who we think did it better on each album. So we have the final album from Thin Lizzy, Thunder and Lightning, featuring Mr. John Sykes, joining up alongside Mr. Scott Gorham. And then we have Another Perfect Day by Motorhead, featuring Brian Robertson from Thin Lizzy, coming into Motorhead to replace Fast Eddie Clark. What's interesting, both of these records at the time were kind of, for some people, now Sykes made Thin Lizzy too heavy. For other people, Robertson made Motorhead a little too not Motorhead-like. And
melodic.
Or whatever. They're too melodic, right? They're too clean. And Motorhead's got to be dirty and grungy, blah, 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 blah. I never kind of bought into either one of those statements. I think that Sykes, may he rest in peace, we just lost him, tremendous talent, really gave this band a kick in the ass. And it's the heaviest Thin Lizzy album, but who's complaining, right? There's everything you love about Thin Lizzy's here. I think Phil sounds pretty good on here. There's a lot of great songs on here. The title track is great. Cold Sweat. I even like the moody stuff, like Holy War and The Sun Goes Down. Just great Thin Lizzy stuff. And then this album, there were so many people that were upset about this album when it first came out. And, then people went to see them live and they're like, oh, Robbo's wearing shorts and he's wearing bandanas and all this kind of crap. You listen to this album today, there's no difference here in the heaviness and just dirtiness that is Motorhead. Maybe the guitar solos are a little bit more tasteful or melodic or fluid, maybe, because he's, no disrespect to Fast Eddie, but Robertson is a better lead guitar player. That's just the way it is.
Definitely.
And I mean, there's just some great stuff on here. I mean, Tales of Glory, Back at the Funny Farm. This is a rampaging great album. And I remember when they parted ways, I was actually really upset that we didn't get more with Robertson in this band. And he really hasn't done a hell of a lot since then. And I think, it would have been kind of cool to see a nice long kind of relationship between the two of them and Brian for maybe a couple more albums. But if I had to pick, I probably would go Thin Lizzy by a hair, just because it's Thin Lizzy. I love Motorhead, but I like Thin Lizzy more. And I think this is a really, really great album for them. And one of the greatest ever final albums in any catalog ever. So yeah, that's my pick.
Yeah, it's funny. On Another Perfect Day, everybody always, that's all they remember is the arpeggiated melodic part on I Got Mine. It's like I Got Mine is that album's I Was Made for Loving You. Almost, right? Yeah. And the rest of it's pretty heavy, right? So and I would go with the Thin Lizzy too. There's just too many great songs on that, too many important, really cool songs, even the mellow ones, even Bad Habits, I mean,
Bad Habits is awesome.
The only one I don't like the title track, but almost everything else from that album I totally like. And I don't really remember the Motorhead songs as being way better on that album than other ones, but I have been known to call that my favorite Motorhead album. So it's up there somewhere, right?
Yeah, I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's easy because when we did the Thin Lizzy show, Thunder and Lightning is my favorite Thin Lizzy record.
Oh, yeah.
It's great.
It's just crushing. Cold Sweat, the title cut. I love Bad Habits. I mean, the whole album is just, man, I love it. I love Sykes on that record, But there you go. All right, Martin, last pair. What do you got?
Well, okay. Well, this worked out good because just coincidentally, my last History in 5 Songs episode, I called the last great pre-Metallica albums, right? And I did this whole treatise of Kill 'Em All up against Kill 'Em All, kind of inventing a new kind of music. I often say that's the invention of metal versus heavy metal, right? So you get the invention of thrash, July 25th, 1983. And it's, but there are other great albums coming along, but all of a sudden they're great albums of a previous era, right? So in that show, I had like Dio, Holy Divers, Sabotage, Sirens, Merciful Fate, Melissa. One of the albums I'm going to talk about here, and I can't remember what the other one would have been. Blah blah blah. Oh yeah, Raven All for One, right? So everybody's making these great albums, these great statements, but they're statements of the 70s or the new wave of British heavy metal or something. So I'm comparing Kill 'Em All, new kind of music kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. First thrash album ever, against the dying vestiges of the speed metal era, Forged in Fire. So these both came out in 1983. And I went and played this again quickly before we got on. And it's such a perfect comparison because the most thrashiest things on here, something like Motor Mount or Winged Assassins, what else? Maybe Shadow Zone, Butterbus Jerky. The thrashiest things on here basically sound like the Metal Massacre version of Hit the Lights. And Hit the Lights actually sounds like the least advanced song on here, right? Granted, this has a lot of songs that are mid-paced and are not particularly thrash. But so what's happening here, and I've often been saying this lately, it's like thrash is invented. The only difference, the main difference between thrash and speed metal, there's two: the palm muting and the closing of the hi-hat kind of thing, right? It's just everything's locked down and trying to have great production values. But so the very heaviest stuff on here sounds like that, and it also sounds like Exciter. And then also this has songs that are a little bit pre-hair metal-y, like Hard Times, Fast Ladies, Make It Up to You. So they're a little all over the place, and some 70s and some new wave of British heavy metal. So the tragic thing about Anvil, I guess, is that, and then even from here, they even regress further, and Metallica just takes off. Like they just write a masterpiece for the next album. Their songwriting just goes 10 paces further, right? Ride the Lightning and Master are amazing. And from Anvil, we get Strength of Steel. And I don't even remember what the other one was. So it gets worse, right? Because we had Metal on Metal in 1982. But so for this brief moment, they're kind of in the same space. They're this almost invents thrash, and Kill 'Em All goes further to invent thrash, but doesn't go all the way. But then Metallica, it's like Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden goes like this after the debut, and Angel Witch, who's as good, goes like this, right? And this is the same kind of thing. Metallica takes off, Anvil dives. So yeah, I think that's a good comparison for 83.
You know, it's funny about Metallica. When I was in college, I was not into, you know, the new bands that were coming out at the time, which was like your Metallicas and your Anthraxes and so on. And I had a buddy, a college buddy, Rob, who kept pestering me, dude, you gotta listen to Metallica. You gotta listen to Metallica. And I'm like, man, I don't like that, because I don't like I'm not a thrash guy. I'm not. And he's like, oh, but no, it's not all that. It's not that fast stuff. Anyways, he lent me Ride the Lightning, and I went, holy shit.
Yeah.
Creeping Death. It's like, okay, I'm in, right? And then I went back and I got, you know, Ride the Lightning. At the time it was Ride the Lightning and Kill 'Em All, and then Master of Puppets, and it's like, holy shit. And I still don't like their fast stuff. I don't like Hit the Lights. You know, give me Four Horsemen, give me, you know, Seek and Destroy, give me, those are the songs that I like, the riff songs, the chugging, that stuff I really like. And yeah, man, there was nobody doing it like, at least that I was aware of at that time, you know, as Metallica, and I didn't think I could get past the vocal, but I could. I mean, that vocal, you know, Hetfield, I can handle that. And I'm to this day still dig Metallica.
See, the funny thing though is Hit the Lights is kind of like a frantic, unraveling, barely held together speed metal song.
Motor Breath was
Metal Militia, right? On the other hand, is a fast that is not hard on the ears at all. Like, it's fast, but it's just, you're just marveling at how absolutely locked down that thing is, right?
Yeah. All right.
I think that Anvil album is probably their last gasp, because I don't think they ever topped those first two records. Not even close.
Yeah. Well, the second and third record, right? Metal Militia, and yeah.
All right, so for my last pair, speaking of heavy metal,
Metal Militia, I meant Metal on Metal. That's what I meant. Yeah, Metal on Metal. Second one, 82. Forge of Fire, third one, and then yeah.
That actually got radio play. Metal on Metal.
Yeah,
got radio play. Yeah. So speaking of heavy metal, my last pair are a couple of British legacy metal acts, multiple records, and they're still out there. They're still touring, and they're still putting out new music. And I'm pitting Invincible Shield, Judas Priest, with Saxon, Hellfire, and Damnation. So both these records came out in 2024. They're both phenomenal records, both produced by Andy Sneap, although Mr. Bruford was involved, or Byford was involved with the production on the Saxon record. Both have some fantastic songs, great playing on them. You know, Madame Guillotine, Something in Roswell, some really, really good songs, really old style, classic heavy metal songs, right? They're still producing that stuff. It still sounds great. It still gets you pumped. It's awesome. Judas Priest, you know, there was a little bit of involvement with Glenn Tipton on this record. I think he did 2 solos on this whole record, but he did help write a couple of songs. But this record is, guitar-wise, this was the Richie Faulkner show. And Richie Faulkner is unfreaking believable. Like his input on this record, his playing on this record, there's a lot of parts where it sounds like they're trading solos, but I really think it's Richie on both speakers, okay? Just trading with himself. All kinds of sweep picking going on. I mean, every time I hear that guy, it's like, what, he can do that? What, he can do that? I didn't know he could do that. He just kind of keeps raising the bar. The arrangements on the Judas Priest songs, there's some really interesting, tangents that they go on in the record and whatever. Some really, really cool arrangements. Both albums sound fantastic. The guitars sound great. The drums are nice and big. The vocals, but when you listen to them back to back, the Saxon album is really, really good. But when you listen to the Priest stuff, just the band is just I don't know, they almost sound, I don't want to, prog is the wrong word, but they're like, they're it's just a more complex version of metal. You know what I mean? There's more going on. There's more playing. There's more tightness. You know, everything just seems to be locked in a little bit more. The songs have a little more depth musically to them overall, you know, and I mean, Halford is Halford. I mean, Mr. Byford, he sings quite well and all that stuff, but nobody can, I mean, Rob is his own thing, right? And but they're both really, really good records. But man, when I listen to, because I just listened to them back to back again, and man, Invincible Shield, man, I think I'm digging that more than Firepower. And Firepower was right up there for me, but I think this record is just a little bit better than that. It just has more going on. The complexity of it. I mean, it's like you're listening to like the best version of an 80s metal band ever. It's like the execution and the complexity. It's phenomenal. Like what these guys are doing on that record, unbelievable. And I gotta hand it. It's basically, we're talking Richie. This is Richie. Glenn's out of the picture basically, right? Unfortunately, but this is Richie, man. And Richie has taken this band. He's injected all kinds of youth enthusiasm and life into this band, and he's just taken them to, another level. So obviously,
another funny thing I thought of that's a similarity is you see them live, and both Biff and Rob are in big trench coats, and they're just kind of calmly walking around the whole show, right? And it's a little bit like Phil Anselmo, right? That's the big difference with Pantera now. Obviously, as well, but Phil, you look at him and you go, he looks the same. He's just moving a lot less, right?
I mean,
walking around doing his job, right? And Biff and I just think of both of them now perennially in a big trench coat now. But I mean,
Byford and Halford. I mean, these guys got to be in their late 60s.
70s.
What's amazing is that they can both sing as well as they do still. I mean, Halford's not holding back on this record, man. He's nailing it, And I haven't seen Judas Priest live since the Firepower tour. And I remember being really upset. If you remember, when they announced that tour, there was no mention that Glenn Tipton wasn't going to be there. And then after the tickets were sold, they said, well, Glenn is not able to tour. And then they brought in Andy Sneap. And I went to see them at Casino Rama. You know Casino Rama, Martin. And, I was really upset because at the time, Andy Sneap, he looked like an accountant. I mean, he had short hair and he's got an Explorer on. I'm like, that guy, what doesn't belong on this stage? That guy. But, and then, but Richie was, I mean, his own stuff, he's playing fantastic, but he was covering a lot of the Glenn stuff, and he does the Glenn stuff really, really well. I mean, it wasn't lacking musically. They did let Andy play a couple of things, but right off the bat, I'm like, that's not right. That's not right. It's just.
But in reality, Andy's actually more metal than all those guys.
Yeah.
That is
well,
true.
I mean, I mean, he's almost got two careers going simultaneously, right? He's a touring guitar player for Priest, and he's doing all this metal producing, right? He's doing all these, and it's all these legacy bands, that he's doing, like Priest and Saxon, Accept, and all this, right? He's almost got a whole other, he's like the guy right now for that stuff. So
I think this was a great comparison, these two albums. I think both bands are on quite the roll with their last couple of studio albums.
Yeah.
Just really, really high quality. I mean, you got two singers who are both over 70 and at the top of their game still. And these albums are just meticulously produced and really great sounding. And I would also give the Priest a slight edge, but I think Saxon's on an even better roll than Priest is as far as like their last 4 or 5 records. I mean, they've all been consistently really, really high. And there's no Nostradamus in there anywhere, right? They've just got one banger after another. But yeah, I mean, Invincible Shield and Firepower, they could quit today, and to have those be their final 2 albums. It's pretty
Redeemer of Souls was kind of, that was
It's good.
Not on the level of Firepower.
Not quite, but it's good. Yeah,
it's good. I'm not saying, yeah, it's good, but I mean, when the Firepower and then this record, it's like, oh yeah, like if they said, okay, that's it, we're not doing any more records, like that's a really nice way to cap it off. I agree with you. You know, and the Saxon record too, like, yeah, I mean, I don't know how these guys are doing it, to be honest with you. You know, like just still putting a quality 80s metal, you know, and I love that. I absolutely love that stuff.
Well, you know, you talk about Richie Faulkner and how he's become such a driving force of Priest. I mean, they basically overcame, you know, they parted ways with KK.
Yeah.
They overcame, you know, Glenn's obviously his health, and they haven't missed a beat. You know, Andy comes in and produces, plays on the tour. I mean, look at Saxon. Paul Quinn had to retire from the band because he couldn't tour and play live anymore. And they bring in Brian Tatler from Diamond Head, and man, they don't miss a beat either. He fits right in. I mean, he's a contemporary. He's amazing, and it's just like they just keep going.
That was a good fit. That was a really good fit. You know, what always impresses me too with Faulkner, I mean, because you know he's a major part of the songwriting, is that guy's writing Priest music. You know, it's not like the band has changed its sound or it doesn't sound like it still sounds like Priest. If anything, it sounds like Priest on high octane. You know what I mean? It's like a killer version of Priest, right? You know, I mean, it's amazing how
it helps that they brought a guy in who was a huge fan before he came to the band, right? Because you have to be.
Yeah, and he just fit in beautifully, right? So there you go. Nice. All right, okay, so you guys, anything you want to mention, Pete, Martin, upcoming in your channels or podcasts?
Well, Martin and I will be back tomorrow morning at the Friday Morning at the Funhouse on SOT. We're going to be talking about front-loaded CDs, specifically looking at albums that were released during the height of the CD era, where maybe the albums are a bit long, and we feel that they're really front-loaded with great songs in the beginning. But after 50 minutes plus, the back half kind of wanes a little bit. So we'll be doing that tomorrow. And then for those fans of Canadian music who like Max Webster, I'll be doing a Ranking the Album show of Kim Mitchell's solo albums.
Oh, cool.
Sunday. So that's coming up on Sunday. So, yeah, that's what's happening on SOT.
All right, Martin.
Well, there's the audio podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, which is now at 296 episodes. We got the video channel, of course, The Contrarians, and I've been doing a Who Invented Heavy Metal series there and a Reliving Old Reviews as a Useless Tool of Confusion. I think I've done 70 of those now, believe it or not, where I just look at an old review and kind of, comment on it. And martinpopoff.com for the books. The most recent is the Priest, Judas Priest album by album, and Van Halen at 50, Kiss at 50, still got all those, the Uriah Heep, all the other panel books, Thin Lizzy Rainbow. So yeah, all at martinpopoff.com.
Cool. So folks, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. That would be much appreciated. Please hit the like on the way out. And if you would like to support the channel, the links are below. And I want to thank everybody for watching. Guys, hang out for a bit. And we'll catch you next month. Take care, everybody.
Right.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.